Hi everyone, this is Lauren coming at you from the break zone with another deck tech video. This one going over the da-da-da-da. This one was Water Ice Leila Vikings deck that was piloted by Matthew Okimoto to a top 8 finish at the Indianapolis Crystal Cup. And the name of the deck was Rice Doesn't Believe in 3 Nidhoggs. For anybody that doesn't know, that's a quick shout out to Matthew Rice, who also piloted this deck over in Indianapolis. So this is a very interesting take on the archetype that's been popping up quite a bit lately. The main engine would be Leila and Vikings, and there's also the Nidhogg Rinoa combo, pretty much enter the field abilities and Rinoa in combination with Scholar, Time Mage, and Devout in order to get the most out of your enter the field abilities. So let's start off with Nidhogg. For anybody that hasn't played the pre-release or any sealed events, Nidhogg is a beast. I mean, we're talking about 9,000 power forward, and at a 9 cost where you're like, well, that's a tough pill to swallow. You expect a lot of mono ice discard to kind of pop up here and there. This deck actually does pretty well. The Leila Viking engine usually does pretty well against what's it called? Against mono ice discard, turbo discard as well. And so, yeah, I mean, this deck kind of pops up and does really well against it. And then after that, you pop down Nidhogg, you set your opponent back quite a bit. Maybe you play Rinoa, and you can even go ahead and get her to enter the field again. You target your Nidhogg. Your Nidhogg targets your opponent's forward as well as a card at random from your opponent's hand. So a card at random from your opponent's hand is kind of interesting. It's not as good as seeing your opponent's hand and picking a card from it, but it does remove it, which makes it, and it is random, so that's a little bit better than having your opponent choose which card they want to discard and then go ahead and do that. Instead, it picks at random and it removes it from the game. So none of that, you know, let's go ahead and minor or devout back those or maybe even Leila Vikings, put all that away in the break zone and bring it right back. That's not an option when it's removed from the game. All right, next up we've got Cid Raines. 3 copies also, goodness. So yeah, you play Cid Raines, maybe you use a combination of Scholar, Leviathan, Rinoa, any of those like Time Mage and everything, and you might be able to get 2 cards out of your opponent's hand and to take out a forward, which could be quite relevant. Since you're going to be flooding your board with a bunch of smaller forwards at first, and then maybe later on going for something bigger, go ahead and play a Cloud of Darkness. So if you watched the stream, you saw Matthew Okimoto kind of chain into putting down more forwards, followed by a Cloud of Darkness. And keep in mind that with power reduction, even if a forward is not able to be broken by opposing summons or abilities, actually reducing its power below 0,000 power, below 1,000 power, so to 0 or below that, is actually going to put it in the break zone, which does not count as breaking. Next up, we've got Genesis. Great card. Everybody's pretty familiar with this card by now, I believe, in competitive as well as in semi-casual. It's really good. Its enter the field ability of Dull and Freezing can be quite a big tempo boost, as well as forcing cards out of your opponent's hand if they're a little bit lax about putting up blockers, or even if they do put blockers, go ahead and Glasya Labolas or Nidhogg them out of the way and just go on through. Next up we've got Rinoa. Like I spoke about this deck, it is a main part, a key engine to this deck, and that's why you have 3 copies of her. Even if she is in break zone, go ahead and use Devout and bring her right back, and maybe get a second Nidhogg activation. A second Nidhogg trigger, or maybe a Genesis. Next up, we've got Vayne. You have no way to search out your Vayne, so 2 copies is a pretty good call, as a lot of forwards tend to be, or a decent amount of opposing decks like to play 5 drops or higher, and being able to dull them down and not letting them activate again is going to allow your smaller forwards sometimes to just get through. Serah. She is one of the targets for your Mach 13-2, including Cid Raines. Sometimes you just need to flood the board, set your opponent back a little bit, and that's definitely one way to do it. If you already have a Cid Raines in play, searching out for another Cid Raines, and if you want to thin out your deck, it's not going to be that great. And so maybe if you want to search out a Serah, go ahead and play her down and force your opponent into a tough situation. Next up, we've got the Emperor, who proved himself over at the Boston Crystal Cup, also piloted by Matthew Okimoto, also a 1-of. So keep in mind this card is really good against the Leila Vikings engine, because there's definitely times when your opponent is going to try to kind of slow you down and build out their board by playing Leila and Vikings, but all of that card draw is going to force them to duel and freeze a forward of your choice, so that way you can get through. Next up, we've got Viking. Like I mentioned, part of this deck relies on the Leila Vikings engine, and here it is. So enters the field, draw a card, leaves the field, draw a card. By leaving the field, we mean that means whether it's broken, put into the break zone, removed from the game, or returned to your hand, any which way it leaves the field, you're going to get to draw a card. Next up, Leila. Part of that Leila Viking engine, obviously. Keep in mind, she's also a Final Fantasy II character, so on the future video, when I go over the Final Fantasy II deck, it actually comes into play. It was actually showcased also on the stream. If you haven't seen it, go ahead and check it out on Square Enix Presents. You'll be able to look up the Indianapolis Crystal Cup and see how it played out. And last but not least, for the forwards, Celes. So she's great. Also, her special does come into play at times. There's a lot of times when your opponent's trying to play combat tricks and use summons that way. She's going to be able to protect you. And if your opponent is falling a little too far behind and trying to build out their board, you can slow them down by freezing a backup that you just put into play. Or maybe if you were able to freeze to duel an opposing forward for a while, let's say Glasya Labolas, something like that, duel freeze, or duel and discard, play Celes, freeze it. I keep it just duel for one more turn and go ahead and get through. Alright, let's start going over the backups. 1-of Scholar. So there, with so many enter the field abilities, Scholar can come into play. Good early turn play, as it's a 2-drop backup. And it's really good mid to late game when you might want to play some special tricks when you get one of your forwards back to your hand to play it again. Next up, we've got 2-of Gladiator. There's times when your Leila is already on the field and you want more Vikings. Gladiator is going to be able to do that for you, and also a 2-drop backup. Next up, 3-of Artemicion. So with the current meta, there are some decks that are very aggressive. We're talking about turbo discards or scions. Artemicion is going to allow you to build out your backups and actually mold your hand for future turns. So there's times when against aggressive metas, you have some cards that are very key to that are very good against them. Very good counters, but not so good against other decks. Or maybe sometimes you get stuck with 2 to 3 Nidhoggs in your first hand and you might only just want one. So go ahead, use Artemicion and put a couple cards at the bottom of your deck, including maybe extra Nidhoggs. And later on, if you want to try to draw into them, go ahead and use one of your backup that helps you search, so you can shuffle them back into your deck and hopefully draw into them when you need them. Next up, we've got Bran, who is an EX burst that can also search out Gladiator. And so with the Leila Vikings combo, you definitely need a Viking early on. And with these 2 copies of Bran, you'll be able to technically count it as 5 copies of Viking to some extent, if you're trying to draw into them. I mean, you want them early, but whether you want them often or not is up to you. But if you have a Leila early on and you have no Vikings, she doesn't serve much of a purpose. So you want to draw into the Vikings, and sometimes you can't seem to draw into an actual Viking, but you draw into a Bran. Go ahead and play her out. After that, you'll be able to discard the Viking to play Leila, and then bring it right back with the Leila. Next up, we've got Time Mage, 2-drop backup that's able to break for an awesome mid to late game effect. Works really well with Rinoa or Nidhogg. 1 copy of Mog 13-2 to search out those Cid Raines as well as those Serah, as that 1 copy of Serah. Gestahlian Empire Cid, in case you have a Celes and you need to protect yourself from summons, go ahead, play the Gestahlian Empire Cid, search out another copy of Celes, and show your opponent that if they have any key summons they're trying to play out or run you into, you'll be able to stop them. Next up, we've got Duke Larg. So I'm sure Matthew Okimoto expected a decent amount of mono ice, and in Mono Ice, what happens is their forwards aren't that big, and if you're able to match them with certain forwards that are popular, such as Celes or Genesis, and you get a Duke Larg out, you're going to be able to stop them dead in their tracks, because they're going to be attacking into your larger forwards. They're going to start losing out. So with Duke Larg, you're putting yourself ahead of them. Turbo Discard should struggle quite heavily against a stabilized board with a Duke Larg, because normally they don't play one of their own. And at that point, having a 9,000 power Celes is going to be very effective. Next up, we've got Devout. So Devout is really good mid to late game. Early on, you're kind of setting, it's like an investment. You are discarding extra cards early on in order to get it out. It's not a 2 CP backup. We could think of it as, well, if you get a certain cards out of it, maybe like a free backup to some extent, meaning that if you get 4 CP out of it, if you bring back, let's say, a Rinoa or a Genesis with it, then it's going to be good. Keep in mind that, for example, or even a Vayne or an Emperor, is going to be very effective. Any of your 4-drop back forwards, you're going to be 4 drops or below forwards, you're going to be able to bring them back from the break zone. Doesn't work quite as well if your opponent is discarding all the cards out of your hand, but against any other deck that's not a turbo discard, Devout can be pretty darn effective. Alright, let's go over some of the summons. I can never get enough of Glasya Labolas. Just keep in mind that if you're trying to deal 7,000 power to a forward, it only works on a dull forward. Even if you choose to choose one forward and dull it, followed by choose one dull forward and delete 7,000 damage, that forward is not a valid target at the time when you are choosing the second mode, and thus the second part of the ability will actually not go through. It will fizzle. And also keep in mind that if your opponent is somehow able to remove the forward that you are targeting, they can cancel out the whole Glasya Labolas effect if you chose to force your opponent to discard one card from his or her hand, as well as one of the other effects. So be very careful about that. I mean, there's definitely times when you might want to think about your opponent having special effects. I mean, especially if they're showing, for example, they have quite a few backups and they have an active Scholar. And if you choose to force them to discard a card from their hand and to maybe dull a forward, they might return it to their hand. I mean, you have to be careful about fizzling the effect, because I've seen it happen before. Also, if you do target Ilua for the first time that turn with the Glasya Labolas, the whole summon will cancel, so be careful about that. Alright, and last but not least, we've got Leviathan. This is a 3-drop one from Opus 6. There's some interesting modes from it. Keep in mind, this is the only copy of Leviathan that does not have EX Burst, but being able to choose one action and cancel its effect, if your opponent is playing something like Devout, you're going to be able to use Leviathan as a semi, you could say, hackathon here, where your opponent is, if your opponent is trying to break their Devout in order to play out a forward from their break zone, you're going to be able to cancel that out, and they would still lose their Devout. I haven't seen the third option used too often, the one that says during this turn, the forwards you control don't receive any damage from summons. Keep in mind that's not going to save you from Opus 4 Hackathon Care or Opus 6 Titan or Opus 2 Raban, because those cause a forward to deal damage. So that's a little bit different. It's similar to how you can get around, let's say, Opus 5 Ishtola or Opus 2 Legendary Cecil. Those cards aren't, hold on, let's see, how do I phrase it? Opus 4 Hackathon Care and Opus 6 Titan don't cause damage as a summon, they cause a forward to deal damage. So that's different. So don't try to stop it with that. It would definitely stop any kind of played, let's say, Bahamut or any kind of direct damage. But I would think that the main ability you'll be using it for would be the second one, and possibly the first one, where you can return a forward to their owner's hand, maybe clear the way for yourself, or maybe return a Cid Raines to play it again. So hopefully you like this deck. Give it a shot. It's pretty fun. I mean, hey, who doesn't want to play 3 Nidhoggs? It's one of the most expensive in terms of CP cost for us to play, and being able to Nidhogg followed by Rinoa, that's a little bit of a personal win for me when I pull that off. So hopefully you like this deck. Thank you, Matthew Okimoto, for putting it out there, having a great time with it. It's been a blast watching you. It was a blast watching you and commentating on that match that you had. And if you like this deck, hopefully, well, you go ahead and give it a try. And on top of that, thank you to our sponsor, MatchDeckGames.com, who have a buy list. So if you want to go ahead and trade in some of your cards to get maybe Opus 6 boxes or maybe some other cards, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, feel free to put any comments or questions down below, or and maybe subscribe. And we'll catch you next time.